All right, guys, welcome back to the Powerlifters Program and Podcast, episode 2. We got a very special guest this week, Marcellus Williams. He's team craftsmanship, so a lot of his lifters will be a really insightful discussion. With that being said, let's just get right into the first question. Now, we were talking about this a little bit yesterday in the DMs and whatnot, just a smidge. We want to talk about outliers. So I think the best way to approach this is maybe not talking about outliers and their trainer response in regards to just total workload. It's maybe more of a per weight class thing. Obviously, if someone like Jesus was doing 20 sets of deadlifts a week, that would be a very big outlier versus if you have a small woman doing 10 sets of deadlifts, that's not that crazy. So let's treat it kind of a per weight class thing to start. But do you want to touch on, just with your training experience, if you've seen anyone with a really strange response, volume, intensity, frequency, they were just a very abnormal case in any of those on either end of the spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, I have a client that I worked with for a couple of years named Christian, right? And he is somebody where for his squat, we would work up to one top set a week. That's it. It was always either a triple, a double, or a single. That's it. No volume on his squat at all. The rest of his volume for his legs, he would get in through like leg pressing twice a week. That's it. Same thing with his deadlift. He would just work up to one total set, and that's it. He'd have RDLs on the secondary day, and that's all he's doing for his deadlift, right? And then even with his bench, right, which kind of makes more sense for him because he has a very, very like kind of flat back, long range of motion, close grip type of bench, but very minimal volume on that as well. We're talking like a single, and then like a 3x3. Then his secondary day is like incline bench. He's only benching twice a week, counting the incline bench. So that's an example of somebody where part of it is like due to like his leverages and the like how wide his squat is and how much he can handle squatting that way. And that's the only way he can squat comfortably. As far as his deadlift, how much he can tolerate with his back. And he's just somebody where if he is getting in enough volume through like his accessory movements and the muscles involved are getting bigger, he does not need a whole lot of skill practice to be locked in for the big three, so long as that intensity is where it needs to be on those relative sets. So that's one example, right? And then I've worked with other clients where it's something where it's like, okay, so we're squatting 3 times a week, we're belt squatting twice a week, and then we still have like leg press somewhere in there as well, right? Which is not something I would typically do. Like it's very common for a lot of clients to maybe like, okay, we squat twice a week, maybe we belt squat on one of our squat days and leg press on the other. But to have somebody squatting 3 times a week plus belt squatting, like 2 to 3 sets on any given time, and still needing to leg press as well, isn't super common by any means. But I had a client that I worked with, funny enough, named Colton, who I worked with, who that's what he responded well to. And whenever we took anything away as far as that, it's like his legs wouldn't feel full. He would be lacking in pop. And that's kind of, like the main thing I was really getting at with like my last YouTube video too. It's not so much to say that like, oh, lower set volume stuff doesn't work. No, it's more that like this is a spectrum. And within this spectrum, you have to find where you fall and what works for you, and understanding that it can vary, right? You can be somebody where you can need quite a bit on your squat and maybe not as much on your deadlift. And maybe those two things go together. Maybe because of how much you're doing on your squat, it feeds into your deadlift, right? So there's lots of things we have to account for with that. I mean, even I myself, for a couple of years, I was only working up to 1 deadlift single a week. That's it. And I would have RDLs on my secondary days sometimes, not even the entire time. And my deadlift was just blowing up while I was doing that. And then over time, I got to a point where I had to start adding in a little bit more volume when I got to a certain point to kind of break past that plateau. So even what works for someone in the moment might change, right? As they build more muscles, their top end of strength goes up. All that comes into it. And then of course we have people like Ashton Ruska. He squats and deadlifts typically once a week on his low bar squat, typically just working up to 1 set. We sometimes would play with like having high bar on a secondary day and having some volume there, but now we're at a point where we're just finding even once a week is still just better for him in regards to that. So there's lots of factors that can go into this. Obviously, somebody's top end strength matters, right? You're probably somebody where the stronger you are, the kind of the more variety you'll probably have with how you get your work loaded, right? Like if your squat max is 300 pounds, then yeah, chances are working off like, a 3x5 off that percentage is probably going to be fine for you. If your squat max is 800 pounds, that might be a lot at the same given percentage, right? So we have to look at things from that relative perspective. But yeah, I mean, like I said, right now I work with, anywhere from 80 to 85 full clients. I've worked with over 300 lifters in my time doing this. And if there's anything that I've learned, it's that there are certain principles that are always going to be true, but the application of those principles is always going to vary from person to person for a variety of reasons. There's some people we can kind of figure out why. It's like, oh, well, you weigh this much, or you're this strong, or you're leveraged this way. But there's other times where it's like, by all accounts of your morphology, your training age, this should work, and it just doesn't. And sometimes we don't know why something's working. And I think sometimes we can even get too caught up on that. You don't have to necessarily know why something is working for somebody. What matters is it working, and can you adjust and be consistent and replicate? Obviously, knowing the why is cool, but sometimes you just don't. So,
yeah, I think that's super important. In my own experience, I always used to chase the why so hard. And obviously, to an extent, you have to be able to like make sense of things in your head to even have an informed programming decision.
mm-hmm.
But knowing the exact reason why something's working or why it's particular for you or an athlete sometimes just like eludes me. Like you saw my post yesterday, we talked about that, doing super low volumes, and I'd always be like, oh man, like am I just leaving so many gains on the table? I see other people doing more than me, and I'd up it, and initially I'd be like, well, I feel just destroyed, I feel like I'm going to get injured. Lower back down, progress goes well. So even if you have a very weird response, there's probably just stuff in our brains and our muscles somewhere that's determining how much we can handle. We just can't see it yet, you know?
Yeah, there's certain stuff that's probably just more like a neurological response, and unless we cut you open, we're probably not going to figure out why certain things are the certain way. But for example, as far as like what you said, where hey, you need to kind of at least know the why to a certain degree to make programming decisions. Well, in your case, the why is less of like, okay, I'm responding really well to just working up to this one set because of this specific reason. It's less that and more so, well, why are you doing this? Because when I tried to do other things, it doesn't work. When I tried to add it more, it doesn't work. So that's your why right there, right? You may not know the why behind the mechanism of, okay, why is this working for me? What you do know is when I do more than this, it doesn't work. When I do this, it works. And that's your data that you need right there. You can just build upon that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so important to actually understand. It's just like the basic principles and then looking at patterns and making informed decisions off of that, because you could have someone like Christian who's doing barely any work at all, especially on the comp lift. Then you could have Agata, and I'm sure a coach like you could successfully coach both of them. But if you send either of them to a coach, that's just like a dogmatic coach. They're going to get absolutely chewed up and spit out on Christian's end. And Agata's end, she'll never hit a PR ever again because she'll be so understimulated. Like doing SPD 7 days a week is absolutely insane. I don't know how she recovers from that. How she does.
Yeah, exactly. And even with Agata, it's understanding like part of why they can do that is because they have all these different tools to where it's not like she's going crazy heavy every single day, right? And that's why I try to encourage these new coaches, hey, don't limit your tools. And don't get me wrong, if you get biased towards one way of doing things, you're probably still going to be in a better spot today than what you would have been 10 years ago, because there's so much good information out here now that if you get biased towards one content creator, chances are it might be decent information, but you're still limiting yourself. Because that's why I tell people, like, look, have a structure that you like to utilize. That's fine. You need something to fall back on. But over time, a good structure is something that can be styled and catered to the individual based upon the tools you need. And I was just on another podcast, I think this kid list where I talked about this, where I said, I have different tools, but I'm not married to any of them. I'm married to progress. That's what I care about. Like I tell my clients all the time, I don't care if what I'm doing with you, you're the only client doing it. And I don't care what I'm doing with you looks similar to what I'm doing with 20 other clients. What I care about is, does this work? Do we understand why it's working as far as like being able to repeat it and build upon it consistently? That's it. That's the only thing that matters. And at the end of the day, really, if you think about it, a client is coming to you for your critical thinking skills, your ability to problem solve and get them better. If it's going to you just to do things a very specific way, well, then after 2-3 blocks with you, they shouldn't even need you anymore. They know how you do things. You know what I mean? You're not gonna do any crazy adjustments. And it's not to say that your program needs to be changing so much all the time, but it's more so those small nuance things where it's like, hey, you know what? Let's keep this in structure, but let's move your secondary squat day a little bit closer to your primary. Hey, let's drop the average intensity just a little bit, or let's increase it just a little bit. It's those small nuance changes and recognizing when to make them and where to make those changes. That's what's going to continue to help you evolve as a coach as you learn those things. But I feel like a lot of these coaches aren't learning that stuff because they almost have it too easy to a degree. It's like there's all this great information out there, so they kind of just take it and run with it. They don't have to so much problem solve to the same degree that a lot of us did coming up.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think I was kind of like, my generation was like the beginning of seeing that. I really got into powerlifting like 2019. And before that, you were part of it before that. It was probably very different. And then now it's way different than it was even in 2019. But today, especially, and even me in 2020, 2021, I'd see so much of that info on the internet and you go to it for your answer. not realizing that, yeah, that's a good place to maybe start. And if you're having problems, you can definitely look there, but you still have to treat yourself as an N=1 study and then just work from there. Otherwise, like, you can look at all the science stuff in the world, but if you're not like the perfect average person in every regard, it's only going to take you so far once you're an intermediate and advanced level lifter.
Exactly. And that's why, like, on like Powerlifting Now, for example, like I know Steve, Sean, Matt, they all try to do this as well. But I really try to focus on like, okay, hey, here's the topic. Here's why the topic matters. Here's the generalization of what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. And here's some examples of how you would apply it and why it applies. And here's some examples of where maybe where it wouldn't apply. I like to approach it more like that versus just like, okay, here's what you do. Here's how you do it. Because then people just take that and run with it. Like, I like to really contextualize what I'm teaching people, so you understand that, hey, this is a tool to be used in this specific manner, and then you can apply it this way or that way, whatever it may be, because that's what's really, really important. And mind you, it's normal. We all start somewhere. We all have to kind of start with just kind of almost mastering one way of doing things and getting really good at that. But then you want to be able to expand and build upon that from that degree. I mean, that's what all, in my mind, the best coaches do, and that's why, for me, Powerlifting Now is so useful, not just in the sense of, putting out content and getting more money as a business, but the fact that, cool, I get to have access to Steve, to Sean, to Matt. We talk, we pick each other's brains. And even a lot of stuff that we may do similarly, there's these distinct differences that it's like, oh, I can take that from Steve and use this here. Or, you know what? Sean said that, and I've done that, but I've never done it that way. Let me apply it here. And that's the way you continue to grow and elevate yourself as a coach and really stay relevant with your information.
Yeah, that's a great point too. I mean, there's like Flex, who has on average higher intensities than probably you. You guys have more volume to make up for it. And there's everything in between and even more extremes on both sides. And I mean, all the systems are getting results. You just have to know how to mingle all the variables. And I'm sure you and Flex could swap systems and both have a ton of success with your athletes. It's just sometimes if you really hone on one system and you understand the variables, you can maybe help certain athletes get farther with that system. I'm sure that doesn't matter too much at the beginning stages, but like Ashton, Bob, all those guys, I'm sure their training just year by year has to be more and more fine-tuned, and it helps you push them into that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with someone like Ashton, where his outside life circumstances with military, finally having his PhD, having a child, like there's always something to work around. Like I tell people all the time, even though I'm very big on, hey, when you find what works, try to milk it as long as you can to adjust where it's needed. I feel like every year that Ashton and I have been working together for the past few years, like his program has looked different every training cycle because it's had to. It's like we're forced to. So it's kind of annoying in some regards, but I'm very grateful for it because in doing that, it's forced me to learn so much more and to have these tools to where now if something comes with another client, it's like, oh, cool, we'll do this. I already know what to do because I had to do this 3 different ways with Ashton, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, he's like a different lifter every year, basically, with his variables.
Essentially, yeah.
So we talked about mainly volume in regards to outliers. What about like frequency? Have you noticed anything, or is it more so you can keep similar frequencies, maybe like a 2-3 times a week squat for most athletes? The extra frequency doesn't help too much, and as long as you're undulating volume and intensity, it doesn't matter? Or have you noticed outliers? Like some people just really need to bench more frequently. Some people need to just really bench less frequently.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'll kind of go over each lift. So with the squat, yes, I do feel like most people are going to do well on 2 or 3 times a week. Like I said, there's outliers, like say like Ashton and Christian, where they're going to be okay with 1 time a week. But for most people, if the general idea is like, hey, the more you do, so long as it's proper work and you can recover from it, the more adaptations you're going to get, then most people can handle squatting twice a week. So I would make the argument that if you are progressing off 1 time a week, you'll probably progress faster on twice a week and not really kill your recovery that much. So I feel like most people are probably going to do well with 2. As far as that 3rd day, I always tell people is you add that 3rd day in when there's a need that arises that you can no longer fulfill with just the 2 days, right? So let's say you're at a point where, okay, we know that we just need more volume. That's the key. Like we need a little bit more pop in the legs, a little bit more force in the legs, and we need more volume. And it's like, you know what? We can't add more volume to our current 2 squat days because if we do, it's just going to eat into the recovery. We're already maximizing our accessory work with belt squats, whatever it may be. Then we need that 3rd day to come in. Now, granted, that 3rd day, maybe it is just a belt squat or a leg press. If it's just, I need general fullness in the legs, right? But if it's something where it's like, no, we need some actual more barbell squatting, whether it's for volume, whether it's for intensity, or even it's just for skill practice, right? Like, let's say it's a thing where like, okay, your secondary squat day is already like, there's only 2 days between that and your primary. It's like, okay, cool. I still feel like a little out of practice though. It's like, well, we could move it to where it's just 1 day in between, but then you have to wonder, does that interfere with the fatigue too much? If the answer is no, like, hey, I can squat, rest it and squat again and feel great, then awesome. I still wouldn't have that 3rd day in because we can fulfill the need with that 2nd day. But if it becomes a thing where no, that causes too much interference, but all we need is to kind of grease the groove, that's where you can bring that 3rd day in. Nice, light, easy 2x3, not fatiguing at all. It's just to help you feel good, right? So with squatting, I when I first started, I was very big on like, oh, why not just go to 3 days? Why not just get more in? But it's like, I like to use it as needed now, based upon if I can't fulfill that need, right? With deadlifts, I would say it's the same thing. Most people, like people, it's far more common for conventional pullers to get away with pulling once a week, so long as they're kind of building up their leg and upper back musculature, or maybe doing RDLs the 2nd day, whatever it may be. But most people who deadlift are going to pull 1 to 2 times a week, especially like with the sumo. But what I'm finding even more, especially with sumo pullers, is I'm now approaching it very much like the squat, where, like for example, we just experimented this with Sean Noriega, where we gave him a 3rd deadlift day, because it's like, if the needs we're trying to fulfill cannot be fulfilled with the 2 days we have, let's add a 3rd day. A lot of people for a long time have been afraid of that. It's like, oh, deadlifts are inherently more fatiguing, but we know that's not necessarily true. Like if you're better leverage for the deadlift than the squat, you're probably going to be far less taxed from a concentric only deadlift, where you're basically just standing up with the weight because you're so well leveraged for it, versus a squat where you're loading weight on your back, having to descend, having to stand back up. So with the deadlift, I would say it's similar, where it's like, if we're getting what we need from 1 time a week pulling, cool. When we're not, we can add a 2nd day. When we're getting what we need from 2 times a week, I want to do everything and try every way to maximize twice a week first. And if we've done everything we can, let's play with adding in the 3rd day, right? And that can look like a variety of things based upon what you're doing. Bench press is the one where it's got the most variance for sure. Like I have some clients where we've been working together for years and they're still milking 3 days a week. Like if we try out a 4th day, it just doesn't work well. And typically what you find with that, I would say, is a lot of it can be based upon weight class and then also overall leverage. So typically speaking, lighter weight lifters, whether male or female, with bigger arches, right, shorter range of motion, are probably going to get away with higher frequency benching. You're probably going to be benching at least 4 times a week at some point. Some of them 5, some of them 6. And it makes sense because if you think about it, because you have this shorter range of motion, right, and because the weight's probably relatively lighter because you're lighter weight class, you're only getting so much stimulus per rep anyway. So you probably need to make up for that by doing more workload. And you might only be able to feel, practicing, and groove consistently from getting that position over and over and over again. Whereas if we're talking about somebody with a very long range of motion bench press, let's say they're a heavier lifter where the objective load tends to be higher, that recoverability is going to be different because you're lifting more weight through a longer range of motion. And therefore, it might not be something where you necessarily need to bench 4 or 5 days a week. But once again, that depends, right? I'm somewhere where I'm kind of in the middle. Like I'm an 83 kg lifter, and I have a very long range of motion relative, like, to my frame. And the workloads that I move are pretty heavy relative to my frame. But I'm somebody where my bench thrives off 5 times a week. Like right now, we're doing 3 times a week and kind of just focusing a little bit on hypertrophy. But my best benches, as far as my PRs, have been off 5 bench days a week. But I think the thing we have to look at with that is also my training age, because I've been bench pressing for 14 years. So I think that plays a role with it too. And the fact that the way we approach those 5 days when we're doing that, we pretty much only have like 2 heavy days, like a really heavy primary day and like a secondary intensity day. And the other 3 days are very sub-max, kind of just greasing the groove, getting in that additional volume. So in general, I would say that's what I've noticed with people, like with the bench. It has the most variance because of, one, different archetypes, but there's also things that have to account for your range of motion, how much muscle do you have or not have, how long have you been bench pressing with your training age? Because for a lot of people who lift weights, most people, if they were lifting weights for their powerlifting, they were probably bench pressing, even if they weren't squatting or deadlifting, for a lot of people, right? So we have to account for that as well. But I would say the one that has probably the least variance as far as like frequency, that's the most common, is probably the squat. Once again, 2 to 3 is pretty normal. Besides maybe August, I don't really know anyone that's squatting like 4 times a week right now or more, right? And then I'd say the one that has the most variance is bench press, because there are people benching just twice a week and still doing well, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, some up to 6. And what those days look like can be so drastically different from each other. So that's what I would say in general, as far as like breaking down each 3, as far as like the frequency. I do think that, like, at one point I used to think like, okay, the longer you train, then the more your frequency will have to increase. But I've actually found that in a lot of ways, it's the opposite. It's almost like the longer you train, the stronger you get. Sometimes you can get away with pulling back a day. Like I have a lot of lifters now. When we first started, we're squatting 3 times a week, where we now realize they're better off with twice a week and just having those exposures a little bit closer together, because the total amount of workload they're doing across those 2 days is so much more now that so long as those exposures are on point, that feels a lot better versus having that third day that kind of just runs them into the ground, even if it's something light.
Yeah, that actually leads into the next question perfectly. So you just touched on that a little bit frequency-wise. On average, I'm sure there's variation. Do you notice as lifters get stronger, and it could be in the same weight class or it could be going up weight classes, because you do see a trend as you go up higher classes, people do less work. Do you notice they do more or less work? Because I kind of see people saying both. That's probably because it just does vary to some degree. But the TSG way of thinking is you need to do more and more over time, and obviously they have had a ton of success with that. And then you also see a lot of probably more old school untested lifters that say the exact opposite, but they also had a lot of success with that as well, like Ed Cohen.
Yeah, so I would say, I'm trying to think the best way to work this. So basically, here's how I kind of look at it, right? The stronger you get and the bigger you get, technically speaking, like if we think about the biological law of accommodations, right, and how adaptations work, you have to do more work over time to keep getting bigger and keep getting stronger. I think the reason why people say like, oh, you do less is because the way that work looks is different, right? So when you're weaker, for example, maybe you're doing something where it's like, oh, hey, I was doing like, a 5x5 on my squats, right? And then as you get stronger, it's like, wow, now I'm just doing like a top set and then like a 2x5 or 3x5 back downs, right? It's like, yeah, but look at what that workload kind of looks like collectively when you're weaker with that 5x5 compared to how much workload you're doing now with this really heavy top set of 3 and then your 3x5, that even if it's at a lower relative percentage than your 5x5, the objective load is more. And then are you having to fill that gap with more accessory work, right? Like that's something that I've noticed with a lot of my guys as they get bigger and stronger. In some regards, yeah, the big 3 may seem like it's less in terms of like total volume, but that's because they're doing more work per set at the same given percentage. And then as a result, we're probably having to do more accessory work than maybe when we first started, where they can maybe get away with being a little bit more specific, right? And I think a lot of it depends on what someone's bottleneck is. I think the reason why some people find that, oh, I was doing more and then as I got stronger, I did less, is because maybe you were doing a lot more across not just the big 3, but all your movements, and you're just getting really big and really jacked, right? And then you find that, okay, now that I have all this potential because of the muscle mass I'm on, I can do a little bit less and focus it more on just top end performance and kind of ride that for a while, right? I think that's an example where we see people kind of doing less as they get stronger because they kind of have that foundation. And you can ride that for a certain point, but then eventually you might get to a point where you kind of stall out on that momentum, and then you have to find ways to do more again to pack on more muscle and raise your potential again, right? So I would say in general, as someone gets stronger, right, you probably do have to find ways to do more. It's just what that looks like changes, right? And like you might go from doing more sets on the big 3 to doing more sets on the accessory work, or it might go to your relative percentage is lower, but like your average intensity is lower, but your volume is higher, or maybe like, your volume is lower, but your average intensity is higher. You're finding different ways to get that more in based upon what your response is, I would say. And then the other thing that I would probably go into detail with that too is, especially if we're talking about like tested versus untested lifters, right? There's going to be some differences there, obviously, because with untested lifters, they can kind of afford to do less in general because the PEDs are going to do a certain amount for them at all times. Whereas with tested lifters, you don't necessarily get that. You don't have that benefit, right? So that's why it's a thing where, we always talk about like, hey, as tested lifters, you need to always be focused on hypertrophy to some degree, even if it's kind of in the background. You might have some phases where you focus on it more than others. But even when it comes to that, it's like, okay, how much are you able to get in relatively? What I would say is, I think the reason why some people may find that they're doing less is because life circumstances change the older you get. I think that's a big part of it. So I think it's more so like what you're able to do and still recover from might change because your life circumstances change. Like if we take like the person like, hey, you're in high school, you're in college, your only stress is school, and you're able to train and eat freely, you're good to go, right? That looks very different when you're older, you have a 9-to-5, you have a wife, you have a kid. You can't maybe just afford to eat like the highest quality food all the time because you got to eat what you can afford, right? We kind of can look at how that impacts things too, right? Like I think there's some people where, hey, you probably could train the same way, more similarly for longer if your lifestyle variables stay consistent, but oftentimes they don't, right? So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and have you noticed with your highest level athletes, like a Bob, an Ashton, Petrie, all those kind of guys. Have you noticed that they have any strong similarities, or did they kind of vary on this as well? For instance, I'm sure there are just some genetic factors with recovery that do not make a difference at all. But if you notice, like, yep, the majority of my guys, they can recover from training super well, or vice versa, or is it just like complete mixed bag? Seems like that's not even relevant.
No, it's definitely a mixed bag. Like, for example, that's a perfect example. So Bob, if we look at Bob's training compared to when we first started and what it looks like now, obviously you learned it for things someone responds to, right? But I would say his training looks the most consistent from where we started. We've adjusted some things with exposure. Of course, he's getting stronger with workload, but he's a perfect example of what I just said, where I'm like, if you can keep your variables consistent, you can probably keep a more similar structure and just do more within that structure over time. Because Bob caters his entire life around powerlifting, essentially. Like, his eating is perfect, his sleep is perfect, all that. So we can just kind of keep doing more and more and more. And that kind of is the change we need. We don't necessarily have to do any crazy drastic changes, because he keeps getting stronger. You reset, right? Adjust where you need to with those relative percentages, and he can do it again, right? Like, most recently, when things started slowing down, we just said, okay, man, we're just going to give you more. You're going to push your accessories harder. You're going to have a few more sets on your accessories. Your average intensity on the big three is going to go up. We're going to kind of nuke your top end for a little bit, but we're going to just do more and build up that potential. And now, as we're getting closer to World Games, we're kind of getting back to the more normal structure, pulling back on that average intensity a little bit, pulling back on the accessories a little bit, and letting that top end show up. And now he's like, oh, I feel amazing, right? We can get away with that with him because he's so catered to it. Now, there's a genetic factor there for sure, right? But if I were to maybe compare like genetic factors as far as overall recoverability between, say, Bob and Ashton, I could make the argument that I think Ashton's recoverability might actually be better, but their lifestyles are so different. So that's what plays the bigger factor into it, right? Like, if I had to say, like, and it depends on what we're talking about, right? But if I had to say, based upon like, okay, overall muscle mass, leverages, and all that, I would say Ashton's genetics are better than Bob's. But his lifestyle is like the exact opposite, where it's like the worst lifestyle you could want for powerlifting, right? So, and then with Petrie, it's different too, because I would say in terms of recoverability, it's interesting because Petrie probably has a higher tolerance for recoverability on, say, like accessory movements than a lot of clients. Like, he's naturally very strong on them. He can push them really hard and he's totally fine. But his recoverability on the big three isn't as good as some other clients, right? And we've had to find with him, when it comes to increasing workload, it's not, if we want to increase volume with Petrie, basically, we tend to do it through accessories. And when it comes to increasing his SPD workload, we do it through the intensification of the sets we already have, having to find new ways to do that. Like, hey, instead of your top set and then a 3x5, let's do a top set and then an RPE based set of 5, and then some lighter back downs after that, things of that nature. So I think it really does just come down to the individual, because there's a lot of things that go into recovery. Part of it is lifestyle and part of it's genetic. And as coaches, we can't really fully distinct how much it is either or, you know what I mean? Like, even using myself, for example, I can handle a lot and I'm fine. I recovered fine. Like, even though I've been living for as long as I have been, I don't have any elbow problems, no knee problems. My back feels great. Like, even with the amount I'm doing, you would think, like, especially how I'm leveraged, you would think like, man, he's got to be feeling it. And, you know, I'll get sore sometimes, but it's never anything where it's just like, oh, I'm in so much pain. Like, if you were to come over, like, hey, man, Marcellus, let's race down the street right now. It's like, okay, I can do that, right? A lot of powerlifters are like, nah, I'm good on that. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of factors that I think kind of go into that. Because my lifestyle is not necessarily super conducive for maximizing recovery, but I've kind of always been that way just with anything that I've done. So I think it's kind of like, I would say there's a lot more individual things that go into recovery, both lifestyle and genetics. But I will say this too, you'll probably find certain trends based upon your programming style. Because a lot of my programming style is kind of pushing the top end towards the end as needed and kind of just building up to that. And a lot more of the average intensity is more submax. And when we're pushing things to higher exertions in the accessory work, where there's these more stable movements that won't beat you up as much, that's probably why it seems like my guys can recover from a lot, maybe compared to someone else, because the way we're approaching the workload is different. Like, if I were to have them go super hard in their top sets, crazy high average intensity on the back downs, and push them on accessories, yeah, they'd be fried, right? So
yeah, that makes sense. It's all within the context. And a lot of times people don't see that, probably. You know, Bob sometimes does YouTube videos, shows his back offs, but the majority of athletes aren't showing the intensities of their accessories, their back offs, all the frequencies. So they might look at someone like John Hack, who basically just maxes every week. And obviously there's some other factors there too. And they might look at Ashton, who takes bigger jumps and just have no idea what to do. But there's a little more intricacy there. With that being said, though, you mentioned something interesting with Bob. You're doing kind of like, you said his top end is a little bit more suppressed. You're doing a little bit more work, it sounded like, and now you're pulling back and his top end's showing again. I know Joey B did something similar. He actually, his top end wasn't too suppressed apparently because he hit like 900 the block. I think he was doing all that volume. But when you're pushing that volume more, what are you looking for that signs the athlete is progressing well? If it's not necessarily like hitting block or 3 rep max, 2 rep max, 1 rep max PR at the end of the block, how do you know it's effective and not necessarily wasted time, but it'll actually potentiate?
That's a good point. Well, the first thing I'll say is, funny enough, and most people know this because Bob's been so like in this, like, I'm just going to train and build and show up at World Games. He's not really posting anything. But funny enough, he was actually at a lot of points of this hitting PRs and still hitting these big, crazy numbers. But in his mind, it's like, Bob's interesting because it's like, even if it's a PR, if it's under what he thinks he should be doing, he doesn't care. So that's kind of how Bob is. But basically, the way that we kind of want to look at it, right? And this is whether you're doing something like where you're maybe putting a bigger focus on hypertrophy a little bit, right? Like maybe you kind of lower your specificity, put accessories more, or even if you're just doing what we did with Bob, where, okay, our SBD volume's the same, but we're pushing average intensity higher, pushing accessories a little bit harder, maybe adding a few more sets there and letting the top end suppress is, okay, are you still getting relative progression week to week and block to block? And are you kind of within a certain percentage of where you think you should be, despite the fact that you have that increase? So it's kind of like, if we're still kind of matching numbers that we would be touching under normal circumstances when the workload isn't as high, that's a good sign. Or if we're a little bit under that, then but we're still seeing that progression week to week and block to block, that's a good sign because it's showing us, okay, cool. We're still kind of maintaining or kind of riding right around our typical top end while knowing we're a little bit suppressed with all this extra workload. Because if you're able to do that, that means once you kind of go back to normalcy, then your top end should only explode even further upon that because you're building up that baseline, you're building up that tissue, you're building up that work capacity. Now, what that looks like is going to vary from person to person. You have to kind of know based upon, and this is why like ranges can be so good for top end strength. You need to know, like, okay, under normal circumstances, if things are going well, this is about where I'd expect this person to be. And you then have to ask yourself, based upon when we have increased average intensity or not, what does the drop-off look like? If the drop-off looks normal to what you expect, let's say it's like 5%, and that's normal, and you expect that, then that's fine. But if it becomes a thing where, okay, it's greater than 5% and it's not getting better, like we're not progressing week to week, we're not progressing block to block, we're just kind of stuck in NERC, then you've probably increased it too much because you still want relative progression with what you're doing in that training cycle. So let's say it is a 5% difference. That's fine, but I still should be doing more on week 3 compared to week 2, week 4 compared to week 3. Block 1, it should be a certain baseline. Block 2 should be a little bit more, and we should be able to do it and recover adequately. If it's this thing where we're kind of hitting the same numbers block to block or even regressing, then that's when you know you've gone too far, right? It's okay if you know there's going to be a slight drop off, but you still want to see that relative progression. And that's kind of how I look at it. Is okay, where do I expect Bob to be under normal circumstances? And with knowing that he's going to be a little bit more nude from this, where am I going to expect it to be? You kind of get that data with the first block of when you're doing it, right? You kind of see what that relative drop off is. And so long as that stays consistent, but the relative progression is going up, you're fine. If it doesn't stay consistent because it goes down or it stays the same, then you've probably pushed too far.
Okay, yeah. So just to summarize, like you're looking for some progress still, but like if an athlete comes in and they match their 3 rep max, but they're like, man, I felt smoked today. It's kind of a situation like, well, just next block, you're not going to feel smoked and you're definitely going to have a PR there.
Exactly. It's like you still want to see things progressing, even if it's progressing more slowly, right? Or if you're kind of coming in and matching. Because if you think about it, it's like if you're top and you're matching the person, like, yeah, but you just hit a 4x5 with what you've never done before. And you did it while doing the heaviest work like you've done on like leg press or whatever it is, right? Like that's the thing. There's a time to kind of build like, muscular strength and kind of build work capacity. And then there's a time to like really build upon that, right? And the reason why we started doing with Bob is because it's like, okay, look, man, we're still gaining weight. We're still filling out this weight class. Like we have the extra recovery resources to do this right now. And we're so far out where it's like, okay, coming in and forcing a big PR triple is cool. But the reason we started doing this is what we ran into is like, okay, you have enough juice to come in, maybe hit a big PR triple. And then maybe the next block get a big PR double. But then you're kind of running out of steam by the time you get to the singles, right? Or maybe you only hit the PR triple, you're kind of running out of steam. That lets me know that, okay, our top end is kind of around the same spot. That's why we can't get that same progression we were before. We need to raise that potential top end. So let's push the overall average workload, even if it's suppressed it a little bit, And that when we pull things back, boom, your top end is higher than where it was before.
Okay, I was just going to ask about that actually, and you thought ahead of me and answered that perfectly. So appreciate it. And do you notice any of these factors, like jumping back to before, the volume, intensity, frequency, just overall recoverability? Do you notice that they bleed into block lengths and jump sizes? So like maybe an athlete that recovers better can do longer blocks, or maybe you do shorter, more aggressive blocks and jump sizes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot. I guess there's not as much controversy on this as there used to be, right? Like for the longest time, people would have the idea of like, oh, just keep running a week progression and keep going until you find someone's time to peak or whatever, right? And I've never done it that way. To me, it's kind of like, I feel like you can control someone's rate of progression to a pretty good degree based upon the workload you're doing and how hard you're doing it. And thus you can kind of control what the block duration is typically going to look like, right? Like, for example, if somebody's the thing was like, oh, I just find that I need 6 weeks to feel really, really good. And maybe if you even normalize everything, that's the case for them. But what I found with a lot of clients who come to me where they're running 6 or 8 week blocks, it's like, well, you think you need that much time because you're starting so low. Like you're starting so low that those first 2 weeks are kind of doing nothing. And then you start to pick up momentum. Okay, what if instead of that for 6 weeks, what if we just start you higher? Can you then feel good in 4 weeks? And often that's the case, right? Or with other people where it's like, oh yeah, like I show up on like that 3rd week. And when I hit that 3rd week, I just feel really good. And then that's it. I'm smoked for the 4th. And sometimes it's the opposite. It's like, well, that's kind of happening because you're starting like at a really high point, right? Now, mind you, that's fine. If someone can push, like let's say like in 3 week intervals, like they can build for a couple weeks, push hard and keep repeating that. I think that's technically a good thing because you're getting more heavier exposures, right? But what I found back with myself, I used to run 3 blocks for a couple of years and other clients when we were doing this, what I ended up finding was ultimately you kind of end up outpacing yourself. Like it feels good and goes well until it doesn't. So I think the reason why like 4 to 5 weeks tends to work really well for most people is because for most people, that's enough time to kind of build up to where you need to be. And I think the problem is a lot of people assume that, oh, we can't really control that, but you can. How you pace the workload, where you start your average intensity, where you stop your top end intensity, how you go about your volume, it matters. Like for example, if someone's so convinced like, hey, no matter what, I'm always going to show up and peak on that 5th week, I have to do 5 week blocks. So you're telling me if I have you go RP 10 on week 4, you can still show up on week 5? It's not happening. You know what I mean? Like it's all about how you pace your workload. So I really feel like block duration can have a whole lot more to do with just how you approach workload. Now, mind you, if you kind of paced everything out a certain way, right? And you just notice that, man, even though we push hard on that 4th week and things go well, he just feels extra good on the week 1 of the following block, then okay, maybe his pacing is 5 weeks, right? Maybe that's just a different pacing. That's fine. But I think a lot of people who do shorter or longer blocks are doing it because they aren't accounting for controlling and pacing the workload and how they progress it. Because like I said, I've worked with over like 300 lifters. There's no way you're going to tell me that I just got lucky and managed to find the 300 plus people who all can respond to 4 weeks. That's not very realistic. You know what I mean? It's all about the pacing of the workload.
Yeah, that ties into what we were saying earlier perfectly. Obviously, like coaches are going to have systems they found that work really well for them. You can get a bunch of different athletes and make a 4 week block work for maybe 290 of them, and only the other 10 you have to vary it. And you just vary the factors for the athletes. That makes a ton of sense. And then what about jumps block to block? Do you notice that the athletes that really soak up volume or frequency and intensity can take smaller jumps, and then vice versa? If someone's really beat up easily, they have to take bigger jumps?
Yeah, so a lot of that can also depend on it's kind of relative to one's intensity response, yes. But I think more than just the volume, and the reason why I say this is because I have some people where they do really high volume, right? And they can take really big jumps. I have other people that do really high volume, they take smaller jumps. I have other people, really low volume, big jumps, really low volume, small jumps. I think it has more to do with what somebody needs from a relative intensity standpoint. So the percentages that I always use, right, is typically with the squat on the week 3 going into the week 4, right? Or whatever week you want to do. Like on the second heaviest week going into the heaviest week. For the squat, I found over the years, clients really need between 90 and 95% of their end goal on the week 3 to set them up for the week 4. For the bench press, between 92 and 97%. For the sumo deadlift, between 90 and 95%. And for the conventional, between about 88 to 92 or 93%. Where you fall within that spectrum, I think is very much dependent upon what you need for relative intensity. For people where it's kind of like, hey, I just need to touch something moderately heavy to prepare myself for it, and that's it. Like the lowest I can go where I'll be physically prepared, that's what I need. They're going to be close to that bottom end of those ranges, right? And it's going to make them feel really good because it's like, and typically what you might find is these are the lifters that maybe aren't as leveraged well for a lift, right? Or maybe the recovery variables aren't as great. So it's kind of like, if I touch 95%, then trying to go for 100% next week is just going to smoke me, right? Whereas if I touch 90%, that's enough for me to be physically prepared for the weight to not feel heavy on my back or in my hands or whatever, but I'm ready to go, right? Whereas there's other lifters, and oftentimes these are lifters where maybe they are better leveraged for a lift, right? Where they almost need to touch closer to the higher end of that range to feel really prepared for it, right? Because it's almost like, hey, I'm really well leveraged for a squat. 90% when my fitness is decently high is nothing. It's not going to prepare me for that 100%. Whereas 95% is like, okay, cool. This helps me feeling really physically prepared for next week. But because I'm so well leveraged for this lift, I didn't kill myself doing this before I go into the week 4, right? Like an example I always like to use is like if you have like a lifter who's like 6 foot plus, right? And they have like almost like a good morning squat. When they get in the hole, they're really like folded over, right? If you have them take like 95% or more, right, before they have to go for 100%, even if their legs feel good, their back might be pretty toast from that. So maybe they lean towards the 90%. Whereas you have someone who's built more like, say, like a Russell Orhe, they can probably handle that 95% and still feel good to come in and take 100. And even then, it depends. I have some lifters who aren't leveraged well for the lift, and yet we still find that, no, you need to touch higher of that percentage to feel good. And I have other lifters that they're very well leveraged, and they still prefer the bigger jumps. So I think what it really comes down to is just that relative intensity response. Because no matter what, that's always the goal, right? Like if you're taking 95%, you're not taking it just because you want the heavier weight. You're taking it because, hey, this is the least amount I can take to feel physically prepared for the following week. And that's the rule of thumb that I'd like to take with it in general. Is like less is more. Like if we can get the same benefit of preparedness but take less, I want to do that because it's going to be better for fatigue management recovery, right? But if it's a thing where, okay, we can take less and y'all recover better, but I won't be as physically prepared if I take more, well, then that's when we want to take more, right? Less is more only when you're going to get the equal result from taking less. So I think it just comes down to the individual, like, response to intensity.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense with it being really tied into intensity, most of all. In regards to that as well, though, I know Mike T has a thing, and maybe his system's a little bit more rigid, and so that's why you're more flexible with it, and it works better for a wider range of athletes. Mm-hmm. Where I'm not sure if he still does it. He's changed his thoughts on some stuff, but he used to have a thing like do RP8 every week, and then you can very easily track if you're making progress. If your single goes up by 5 pounds each week, and it's the same RPE, like you're making progress. Do you have any athletes that can just really eat up the John Hack level intensity? Maybe they're not literally doing RP 10s, but they actually do take maybe an RP 7, 8, 9, 10 each week? Or do you still, with those athletes, prefer just a little more work? Maybe their secondary day is heavier and they still take bigger jumps?
Yeah, it definitely just depends. I mean, I do have some lifters where like their week 1 might be something like an RP 7, right? And then maybe their week 2 is like an RP 8. Then their week 3 is also RP 8. But because their fitness is more elevated, they can do more, and then they'll hit like an RP 9 the week 4, right? Especially something like the bench press. I just have some lifters where if we're getting below like an RP 7, it's just not. It just detrains them. So they need to keep their intensity higher relatively, right? So there's definitely are people who are like that, but that doesn't necessarily have everything to do with the jump in the sense of someone can take an RP 8 lift, right? And if their fitness is elevated enough, they can still have a really big jump to that RP 9 the following week based on how you pace it. And that's why, like I said, I use the RP as more of a tool of kind of where I want someone to be within the range. What I'm looking at is more so what load do we need to take or what range load do we need to take to suffice for where we want to be the next week. I don't really care necessarily what the RPE is. And here's why. If you hit the load range need on the RP on the week 3, and let's say it felt tough because your fitness isn't as high, so it's like an RP 8. But we know you're going to be able to come in at 10, 15, 20 kilos on the week 4 and have it move just as well or not better, then it doesn't really matter if it's an RP8 because the load suffices. You were able to recover to come and do what you need to do. At the same time, if you come in and you hit the load that suffices, and let's say the RP set was supposed to be 7, but you blew it up and felt like an RP6, that's okay. We don't have to go up. The load, the stimulus of the load will suffice to set you up for the following week, right? And that's why, like, Steve and I like to use the VBT model, like variable percentage-based training, where we're looking at assigned load, RP-based work, but we're doing it based off ranges and trying to hit these goals of ranges, hitting this specific load. Because it's this thing where it's like, even if you hit I tell people all the time, if you hit a load that you've never done before, right? Let's say like you feel really strong and you hit like a top triple, double, set of 5, whatever, and you're really strong and you move it fast, it looks like an RP7. There's still a fatigue cost with that because you've done something that you've never done before. There's going to be an objective fatigue cost with that because you've lifted a certain amount of weight for a certain amount of reps you've never done before, regardless of how easy it felt in the moment, right? Whereas if we're talking about like, you come in and let's say you feel really smoked and you hit like a top set of 5 with the weight that you've done lots of times, but to switch to a really high exertion, yeah, you're going to feel fatigued from that because you push a high exertion. But how much did you really get from that from like a progression standpoint? You know what I mean? So a lot of these things are relative to that. As far as having anyone where it's like an RPA constantly, no, just because I don't have anybody where it makes a whole lot of sense to keep the exertion that high at all points. Because it's almost like the way I look at it is, okay, if we have an RPE 8 consistently and we can see the weight going up a little bit, my question, I care more about where we finish than where we start. So if you're able to progress that load each time, if you're hitting an RPE 8 each week just due to that recovery variable, let's say you go up 5 pounds each week. Okay, cool. So you finish about 15 pounds heavier at the end. But what if we would have started lighter, more submax, and just ramp things up because you have finished with more weight at the end? That's what I care about, right? And once again, it's all about the type of system that you use. Funny, like in the first Proud Now podcast we ever did, we had Mike T on and kind of discussed all this back and forth. And I just think there's something more to the objective load on the bar itself and what you're doing from a workload perspective that not that the RP doesn't matter, but has a greater impact on the adaptations, the recoverability than just the RPE in of itself.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even you can look at an athlete maybe on a bench or a deadlift where they're super well leveraged. They are maybe just better reps, have smaller range of motion, and they can get on 85% and knock out 10 reps.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can have someone else that is the opposite and they can like a lot of times heavier lifters with longer ranges of motion, they might only be able to get 4 reps to 85% if they're really, really strong. And if they touch 85%, that's way different for a single than the other person who is doing that. I mean, that's an RPE of 1 versus an RPE of 7. That's obviously going to manifest itself very, very differently. So yeah, the individuality is very important there. Back to the outliers. I know your strategy, correct me if I'm wrong, is like people are coming in, they're strong on week 4. It doesn't seem like you typically taper people super hard anymore. Is that correct? On average?
Yeah, so I do, I guess, what you could call the craft minimalist taper. So basically, if technically speaking, if someone shows up, and this is however you program, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever. But if you find like that nice microcycle layout where hey, this person feels strong and shows up good every week 4 or every week 5 or whatever it may be, well then in my mind, it's like do what consistently works and just do that building into the meet. Have the meet lined up on the week 4 or week 5, whatever it may be, right? And build into it. But the thing is, since we know what we do on that week 3 that precedes the week 4 is what makes us feel good on the week 4, we don't want to suddenly change that too much. Like it's this thing where, okay, let's say you're a block out from your meet. You come in, you did your usual week 3 workload, then you came into the week 4 and you absolutely smashed those numbers. Awesome. Well, if then the block going to the meet, if on the week 3 you slash your volume in half, or if you drop your intensity drastically, and then you show up and you feel really recovered, but it's like, oh man, I don't feel as strong as in training. Well, yeah, you just changed the entire stimulus of what you did to make you feel strong. So the way that I approach it is a lot of the tapering happens through the accessory work. We get a lot of that, some of that acute fatigue build up off from just the accessory work. So some stuff we drop by sets, some movements we might move away altogether, especially a bit closer to the actual meet day. And if anything, what we might do on some of those secondary days is maybe we adjust the intensity a little bit. Like, typically do a 50% drop here for your secondary squats. Maybe we do a 20% drop, but we keep the overall volume pretty consistent. Bench, I really don't touch at all. And then the squat, I might adjust a little bit on the secondary day as far as like the average intensity of the back downs, but the top end intensity stays the same. The volume stays the same. The one lift that I will still taper more aggressively will be the deadlift. The deadlift just seems to be the one where, hey, on that secondary day, if you're like a sumo puller, we hit your top set, we pull out your back downs, or hey, if you're a conventional puller, we make your secondary day just some light practice work. That seems to work really well within my system, probably because of the amount of acute fatigue that's always on the deadlift from the squat and from the accessories. So the secondary deadlift day will taper more aggressively. But yeah, the week 3 is going to look very similar, just less overall accessory work, and maybe the average intensity on the later half of the week closer to the meet goes down a little bit, if at all. But that's the way that I like to approach it, because it's kind of like if you over taper, then you're just going to feel like detrained and weak. And if we go to the other extreme where you don't taper at all, I would sooner not taper at all before I over taper at this point, because we already know that you feel strong in the week 4s, right? The purpose of that little bit of tapering is, okay, if we can keep the same relative fitness, but bring that fatigue down just a little bit, then we can maybe squeeze more out than what we just did the block before. So that's the way that I approach things overall. At one point, I did still have a couple people who would do like hit the highest lifts 2 weeks out and then, get through a normal week of training, then the taper week and then come in. But at this point, I don't have anybody doing it, just because it's like, for me, it's like, why? Like, this is consistent. This is predictable. We feel really good. If this person is used to pushing on week 4, if I then have them push on a week 4, but then decide, okay, now you're going to push again 2 weeks later, instead of having a full 4 weeks, you're going to push again 2 weeks later, that's way more unpredictable. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the system too that you run, is if you have an athlete for a while and they're consistently strong in the week 4, you don't really have to worry about variability when it comes to tapering, because if an athlete does 2 competitions a year, instead of 12 opportunities to work on that, there's just 2. And
Yes.
I'm sure there's some variance with, those methods, heaviest lift 10 days out, week out, 2 weeks out, all sorts of things to mess with an athlete. So if you can just consistently get someone strong in a week 4, hitting PRs, which is, the whole point of powerlifting, you got to hit PRs at some point, even if they're not in a competition. I think that's a really great system. I think a lot of the times athletes can maybe make the mistake of not really having a specific time. Maybe it doesn't have to be 4 weeks. Maybe it's every 8 weeks. Maybe it's every other week that they're actively looking to be fresh or going for PRs, even if it's not an RP10. Maybe it's a ability PR. It's a triplet at 8. Yeah. But otherwise, if you just get so lost in the work and you never actually see it come to fruition, it can be pretty easy just to put my head down and grind this off season. I can't wait till this meet next year. And that meet next year comes, you're like, this taper is going to be crazy. And then you shit the bed and nothing happens.
And it's awful. Yeah, man, I would like consistency. Consistency leads to predictability, and that's what we want. Like at this point, for a lot of my clients, and not even the ones that just have SBD days, like a lot of my clients, hey, maybe your primary bench is on Saturday, maybe your primary squat's on Monday or whatever. Even that's fine. Like the point is, you show up strong on a particular week, and we can shift the exposure as needed. But for so many of my clients, they go into meets so calm because it's like, I do this every block. Like this is a week 4 train day without back down bowling. You know what I mean? Like that's the type of consistency that I think helps so much, the type of ability that helps things help so much. I mean, that's a big thing that helped us with blowing up Sean Noriega over the past, almost 2 years ago working together. It's just having that consistency and predictability, not just having these random spurts where you feel really good on a lift on a day you weren't supposed to feel good and you just send it. It's like consistency, pacing. That's what you want to find. Your time to peak in that sense, right? Which once again, I think is something that we have more control over as you pace the workload.
Yeah. So we got about 10 minutes left. So I'll have 2 quicker questions for you to wrap it up. But first, both these are kind of something for people to take away from the podcast, for the average lifter to look at and apply to themselves. Not that the rest of this isn't going to be. This is all great info.
Sure.
But do you notice any characteristics among your top level athletes that have in common, whether it's physically or especially just mentally, that the average person could look at? And maybe they can't change the physical, but it's good to know. Maybe they can identify it in themselves or not. And especially the mentals that they could look at and try to emulate. Or maybe you think those mentals are just completely genetic. All your top guys are just, they think a certain way. It's just way different than everyone else. And they're hardwired that way. Maybe it's not even productive to be that way. But yeah.
Yeah, I would say as far as my top guys, right? I'll go over the mental first. As far as my top guys, as far as the mental, it's 2 things. One, they enjoy training. Like, even if they weren't powerlifting per se, they just love training. They love working out. They love pushing their bodies, right? They love the challenge of it. So it's one of these things where if you don't enjoy training, if you're doing this for a reason that's not outside just the enjoyment of it, it's going to be hard to be at the top, because to be at the top, you have to enjoy going in and putting in the work to a degree. And you also have to realize that there's going to be times where things aren't going the way you want. You have to take a step back and then come back. So you have to just actually enjoy the process. That's one thing, right? Even though, yeah, they want to make progress and they want to be competitive, they enjoy the process. But then the second thing that I would say is they're all very competitive. None of my top level guys have this, oh, it's me versus me mentality. No, I want to beat people. I want to be the best. I want to be number 1. And I believe I can be number 1. right? I think that's the thing, because if you look among my top guys, a lot of them have very different lifestyles. Some people have the super optimal lifestyle for powerlifting like Bob. Some of them have the opposite like Ashton, right? Or maybe somewhere in between like Petrie, things like that, different responsibilities. But the thing they all have in common is they enjoy training, they enjoy working out. If they found out tomorrow they couldn't powerlift anymore, they would still work out, right? But they want to be competitive. They have this thing where it's like, I know I'm capable of being the best and I want to push through it, but they have the patience to see it through. I think that probably the third thing. They're patient. Like, yeah, you want progress quickly, but they're like, even if they have setbacks or things don't go the way they want, because they believe I know I'm capable of this, they will stick with it. They're not going to quit just after 2 or 3 years of things not going the way they want. They're going to stick with it. So I say those are the three things: enjoyment, actually truly being competitive, like meaning we're to lose, I want to go out there and beat people, and then like the discipline to be patient. I think those are the three big mental things. Physically, they're all jacked. like all my top guys, my strongest lifters, they're all so the most muscular, right? Like if you want to be good at powerlifting long term, don't shortchange yourself by just focusing on just your technique, shortest range of motion possible. Oh, I gotta optimize my like, bro, get big. Like actually, and this whole thing with CrossFit, right? You have to actually get jacked. You need to care about getting as big as possible. That's what's going to lead to the strongest version of yourself. Don't restrict yourself to a weight class when you just started and you have a sub 400 dots. Nobody cares. Actually get bigger and just see where your body naturally wants to sit, right? So physically, I'd say that's a part of it. And really, I think that's the only thing to really focus on physically, because other stuff you can't really control. You can't necessarily control your muscle fiber distribution type. You can't control your leverages where your hips assert, but you can take whatever body you have and just get it physically bigger for sure. And then the other physical thing I would say is taking care of yourself outside the gym. Like there's lots of people where they go in, they work out, they push their training hard, but like you get sub 5K steps a day. You don't move around. You're not very active. Like take care of your body. That's something they all have in common. To whatever degree they can, they're trying to get steps and they're trying to move around. They're trying to move their body freely. They're trying to be active in some degree outside of just the gym.
Yeah, funny enough, if I had to write down like top 10 things, it would have just totally escaped my mind to write down enjoyment, which is hilarious. Like that's probably the number one factor. If you're going to stick out in powerlifting for 10, 15 years and really see your full potential through, like the number one factor has got to just be you enjoy it. Otherwise, you're going to quit. And I don't know why. I just wouldn't have thought of that one for some reason.
Yeah, no, it's huge, man. It's like there have been times where I'll literally have a client, not just a client where like maybe, things are going well, but I can tell they're kind of getting burnt out. And I'll completely shift how we're training just the way it's more fun for them, even if it's not quote unquote as optimal. And they'll still make such good progress because they're enjoying it. Like I always tell people, this is what we're talking about, powerlifting, hypertrophy, whatever. The two most important rules, right? The first one is what you're doing does have to be effective, because even if you enjoy it, if it's not effective, it doesn't matter, right? Like if you're trying to get bigger, stronger, it does have to be effective. It doesn't have to be optimal. It just has to work, right? And then the number two thing right next to it is you have to enjoy it. If you have those two things, you will make progress. I don't care what you're doing. If it's effective and you enjoy it, you will make progress. So.
Yeah, and they go hand in hand too. A lot of lifters enjoy progress.
Enjoy progress. Exactly.
That's why they're hiring a coach. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So they're going to do something that's effective. Exactly. Yep.
And then last question for you. If you just want to give people, it can be 1, 2, 3 things, just biggest mistakes that athletes make when they come to you and you're like changing their programming and you're saying, oh, we're going to change. You were doing too many sets, too few sets. We're changing this. Or maybe it's their first block and they're overshooting constantly and they're just not pacing themselves properly. Those are just 2 examples. It can be those. It can be other stuff. But what are the biggest mistakes that you see serious lifters make that if they changed, the people at home would see the biggest impact?
The first thing I would say, especially in terms of when people come to me, is honestly, I would just say effort and buy-in. And here's why I say that. Because a lot of clients, when they come to me, I let them know on the consultation, well, hey, some of the work you're going to be doing on like your working sets is going to provide more sub max than what you've ever done before. Like, but just because it's light doesn't mean you're not intentional. Be intentional. Treat it like it's heavy, right? That's important. Be intentional with every set. I don't care if it's a top set, back down accessory. I tell my clients, we treat heavyweight like it's light and lightweight like it's heavy, right? So that's probably one thing. Just being more intentional, you'll get more out of it. Because even with a lighter weight, because it's light, you're being passive with your brace, your tension, whatever, you might make that lighter weight harder than what it should be. But if you're intentional, you're bracing, you're trying to drive up the hole, you're going to get more benefits out of that rep, right? So I think that'd be one thing, just intentionality. Number 2 would definitely be just like you said, overshooting to degree, but like pacing. Remembering that, hey, this first block is not defining anything. It's not the end all be all. This is the 3-block macro or 6-block macro. Take what you need to take to set yourself up for the next block, right? And then we're on that final block of the macro. That's when we send it, right? So I'd say the pacing of the top end, like basically don't miss the forest for the trees. It's like, remember, this is a long-term thing. Any one session does not determine how the whole block's going to go, and any one block doesn't determine how the whole training cycle is going to go, right? And then the third thing that I would say, the third thing I would say would be actually following the RPs that are given with their accessories. Because I think sometimes, man, because people come to my training and they're so excited about the accessories they get, they're just going RP 9, 10 from the jump, and then they're halfway through the block like, bro, I'm so beat up. I'm like, well, yeah, bro, I gave you an RP 7 on the weighted dips, not 10 on week 1. What are you doing? So, like, the RPs aren't suggestions. Like, follow it. Right. And of course, part of that is on us as the coach. And this is like, I don't really have this issue anymore. I make it clear, like, hey, this is what this RP means. This is what I'm looking for the accessories. I make sure I conceptualize what the programming is so they don't misconstrue it. But that was something I used to deal with starting off. Was like, oh yeah, accessory, I'm going to go crazy on my dumbbell press. Yeah, man, I hit a PR on my dumbbell press on week 2. It's like, well, that's great, bro, but you still have 2 more weeks here. What are you going to do? So stuff like that. Those would probably be like my top 3 in terms of like newer people who come to me.
Yeah, I had a friend hire a coach like last week, and he was like, he wants me to do RPE 7 the first week on accessories. I'm going to just go all out. And I was like, dude, you hired this coach for a reason. Please not do that.
Yeah, I think it's because unfortunately, this is what I've realized. A lot of my clients who come to me, their coach was programming their SBD, but they were kind of doing their own thing with their accessories. So I don't think they understand that, hey, your accessory workload all builds in together. I'm calculating it all together. Like I tell them, hey, you overshooting your accessory lift is no different than overshooting your squat top set, or it's no different than, oh, hey, I have a 3x5 with 350. I'm going to do a 3x5 with 400 instead. It's the same thing. You're not following the program, and thus you're not going to get the result that you want. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think this is a really great podcast, man. I had fun. If you want to tell people where they can find you for coaching, YouTube, Instagram, whatever you want, go for it.
Yeah, so my Instagram is the Swolefessor, all one word. You can find me on YouTube, same thing. The Swolefessor. If you want to, reach out for coaching, don't have a spot right now, but in the future, if you want to reach out for coaching, or even just like if you're a coach looking for a consult call to pick my brain, you can reach me at theswolefessor@gmail.com. And then once again, I'm one of the coaches with Powerlifting Now. So Instagram, Powerlifting Now. And you can also find us on powerlifting-now.com.
Thank you. This is really productive. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Appreciate you, Colton. Have a good one.
You too, man.